Welcome to Bespoken Bones with your host, Pavini Moray, connecting ancestors, sex, magic, and science. Pavini explores transpersonal tools for erotic wellness every new and full moon, engaging educators, healers, spiritual leaders, and scientists in revolutionary dialogue. Get ready to feel good and go deep. This is Bespoken Bones.
Hi, welcome to Bespoken Bones, ancestors at the crossroads of sex, magic, and science. We're in the business of healing trauma, connecting with our roots, and developing radiant erotic wellness in past, present, and future generations. And I'm your host, Pavini Moray. Wanting to say hi to, there have been so many folks reaching out about the podcast. I just want to name a few of them. Ev, Rachel, Aggie, Greta, thank you. Thanks for your suggestions, your questions, the love. It's really great to just hear that there are people out there that are listening to this. And it brings me joy and delight to hear from you and to know that it's helping. And hearing from other folks who have been interviewed, that the connections that are being made out in the real world, where someone hears an interview and then goes and works with that teacher, and then they have a sphere of influence, of impact that person who's gone to work with the teacher has. Then the work, just like the healing, we're doing this together, we're healing together, and so this is kind of obviously the intention of this work. So please be in touch. Would love to hear from you. And just wanting to also invite you to the Ancestral Lineage Healing Intensive workshop that Taya Shear and I will be doing at the end of November. It's 3 days, November 30th through December 2nd in Berkeley, California. 3 days of ritual, dropping in with ancestors, learning skills of how to connect directly with blood lineage ancestors and bring healing or let them bring healing, support them in bringing healing down your lines. And I can just say from personal experience of doing this work now for 3 years, the benefits are really great. I see it in my life. I see how having ancestral support changes things. So check it out. There's lots of other ancestral lineage trainings happening around the country and around the world. So you can check those out too. Yeah, so today it's special because I actually have another ancestral lineage healing practitioner, Maris Orelia Burgoon, who's here to talk with you. And Maris is a mystically oriented Sather worker, oracular and sound medium, and singer-musician. Through her practice, Maris offers ancestral lineage healing, classes in Old Norse-based mysticism and ritual animism, initiation into Sather, and mediumship for the transformation of consciousness. Maris's approach is grounded and practical, and these practices are not for bypassing the challenges of humanity, but rather ways to be deeply resourced when facing these challenges. And in 2013, she co-founded Seattle Sather. That's a little bit hard to say. Seattle Sather, an organization that offered twice monthly high seats where members of the public were invited to sit in council with the compassionate Norse powers. And now she lives in Oregon, and she's founding a new organization there called, correct me if I say it wrong, okay? Hjarta. Hjarta. Okay, got it. Thanks. And the vision of Hjarta is to train practitioners and seed Sather communities in other parts of the United States and abroad. And Hjarta branches provide high seats for local communities and work within the principles of inclusivity, integrity, and service. And Maris also has a MS in neurobiology. And we're going to hear some of her music a little bit later. And for more information, you can definitely check out Maris's website. There's one thing I want to direct your attention to in particular of, I can't remember the title of it, Maris, but it's the piece about the dangers of doing spirit work, or kind of how to do it pragmatically and safely. You know which one I'm talking about?
Yes, in my writings, there's a blog called Safe and Sovereign.
Yes, Safe and Sovereign. That's it. Yeah, it's fantastic. Really down-to-earth, grounded stuff. So Maris's website is www.livingvoicemedicine.com, and you can find her on Facebook at The Living Voice, and her email is livingvoicemedicine@gmail.com. So welcome, Maris. So nice to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Would you just talk a little bit about your own ancestry and introduce us to your people?
Yes, absolutely. My ancestors come from Wales, England, France and Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Poland, And then I have a smattering of genetic connections to other places, but those are the known ancestors. And then on the continental United States, Pennsylvania, parts of the Midwest primarily.
And so this Norse stuff runs in your blood, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. And I want to just start out really by diving into some of your music, and have you introduce what it is that we're going to be hearing. Can you just talk a little bit about it?
Yes. This is, so what I do is I take stanzas from what's called the Erotic poetry. This is poetry that is cosmological and mythological in content. And in one of those poems called the Sigurd Drifumal, there is a section in which a Valkyrie is consecrating and blessing the hero Sigurd. And she says a two-stanza prayer, a two-stanza invocation of the earth, of the natural powers, and of the powers of consciousness, like the Asur deities. And this is the closest thing we have to an actual pre-Christian prayer. So I think it's rather interesting what they invoke and what they say. And part of what she's actually asking for is wisdom, eloquent speech, and healing hands while they live, which I find interesting.
Healing hands meaning?
I don't know. I don't know. But I just
said hands-on healing, kind of like that. Is that a reference to that?
We don't know. She goes on to kind of talk about different actually types of healing. But I just find it interesting because we have kind of probably an idea of, well, what would someone pray for back in those days? And if we had an idea of maybe the Vikings, who may think of like victory and spoils of raids and that kind of thing. But what they're actually asking for are these things. They do ask for victory. We don't know really for what, maybe in life. But then they also ask for these things, which include healing hands. But we don't know actually what the context is for that.
Awesome. Well, let's give a listen, okay?
Okay.
Hela dagssynar, henåt och nift. Orre amalgam, litid och thinning, och gefissit jondom sigar. Hela raser, hela rasen gör hel, sjå en fjol utafrån. Man vid geffet och maren tveim och läcknes händer med en liven. Hel dagar, hela dagsynar, hel nåt och nift. Och redan magum, litid och thinnig, och gefesit jondom sigar. Hela raser, hela rasen, ja, heos, ja, en fjol utafråd. Mal och man vet geffet och maren tveim och läcknes händer med en liven. Och läcknes händer med en liven. Och läcknes händer med en liven.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks. That is really amazing to hear that. And just what a gift to your ancestors to have really trained in that prayer form and be able to communicate with them. Do they like that? Do you have any sense of your people really digging that?
Yes. Yes, I do. I also find that with my Seder practice that that prayer, that invocation actually is really, really actually potent. And so whenever I do it, I definitely feel the presence of my ancestors, and I definitely feel the presence of the compassionate deities that I work with from that realm.
I mean, I think it's probably obvious, but I think that there is something I'm just going to draw it out anyway, of that when you pray in the language of your ancestors, and when you know that these traditional and historic prayers, like you're tapping into something that's been done hundreds, thousands of times, right? And so there's do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I guess what I'd say is that one way to talk about it is that it kind of activates the template of ancestry in a way that may not be activated through our modern use of English. So I've made a point of learning what's called medieval reconstructed Old Norse pronunciation. I made a point of learning. I can actually recite quite a bit of one of the Epic poems in Old Norse, and I do find that there's something to that kind of grounds me into that particular ancestry in a way that it could happen by other means, perhaps, but I definitely find it as a very effective way of connecting with them.
Do you have any sense of, is it familiar to you when you do it?
It's becoming more familiar to me as I do it. Yeah. As my mouth gets used to pronouncing the Old Norse, as I memorize it, as I recite it more, as I get kind of more fluid with it, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Thank you for that. And we're going to hear a live offering from you at the end of the conversation that we're having. So that's something to be excited about. I want to just touch in with you a little bit about like mediumship. And kind of, I know you identify as an oracular medium, and what does that mean, and how are you doing that, and where does that fit in with all of the ancestor stuff?
Yes. So the word mediumship is used commonly to refer to just speaking with deceased people. However, the field of mediumship is actually much broader than that, and it kind of includes it's a sharing of conscious space. So if you think of your consciousness as like a field that's like part of your energy field, it's about the intentional. If you're doing conscious mediumship and intentional mediumship, it's about the invitation to share my field of consciousness with the field of consciousness of another sentient being, for example, a compassionate deity. But you can also be a medium for qualities of consciousness as well, like compassion or even objectivity and that kind of thing. So it's kind of this idea that consciousness, the nature of consciousness intercommunicates. Like by its very nature, it's communicative, and you can share that communication, and you can perceive other consciousnesses through your own consciousness. So mediumship is a very old, obviously very, very old practice. And some of my ancestors definitely have a root in different oracular mediumship practices.
It's good. And I'm curious about that when you say you have a root in these practices. Because, we have, I just feel like there's a solid cultural conversation happening around cultural appropriation and what that means and what that is. And I'm just curious about what it's like or what are the benefits of really having this practice that's rooted in your ancestry. Like you've done some digging here. You've educated yourself. You've really gone to some lengths to establish practices that are like ancestrally relevant to you. Yeah. And like what do you find is the benefit of that?
Well, there's several aspects to it. I mean, definitely we have the issue of cultural appropriation. I think I was lucky enough to have been able to find practices that are reflected in my ancestry, and very viable and very useful practices that are reflected in my ancestry. So there's a familiarity with them that I find, that there's a naturalness to them, and I can ask my ancestors about them. For example, I can ask my ancestors who were seers, who were oracles, who were mediums. How do I do it? So I don't even have to have teachers and mentors are definitely useful. I have another source of information that actually tailors the practice to me. Which I find to be very special, and this is an aspect that I utilize in my work now when I work with other people. It's one of the reasons why I'm asking people to do some ancestral lineage healing work before they do the Sather initiation intensive I do, or other class, or as part of other classes, because then we can say, okay, well, this is kind of the technology. This is the technology of mediumship. But then ask your ancestors, how do you do it? What's some information for you that would be useful in particular? And I find that to be extremely useful. Also, as a teacher, as someone who trains someone else, I really love having for people to have their own resources in that regard, where I can give them some direction and I can give them a structure to work with and the benefit of my experience. And they can also then source it from their own ancestors and their own roots, and they can tailor it to their own needs.
Yeah. I think there's just something really great about not having to reinvent the wheel. That all of our ancestors had ritual technologies that they were using, right?
Yes.
And in some cultures, it's easier to find them out. Like if you have some cultural or ancestral backgrounds, it's easier to find out some might be living, right? And some might be not living, but like the traditions, the technologies, but there's just this sense of, oh, I can lean in here. I can lean into these things that my ancestors used, right? And there's that provides like a closeness as well as a like a validity, like these things have been tested. And there's just something kind of like delightful about continuing, the practices that our ancestors did if we can really tap into them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about, because like with the Norse stuff, talk about appropriation, right? Like, I feel like there's with the kind of the way that some of that is held, especially in Europe, is held through a lens that's pretty, like, I guess, I don't know. It feels hateful to me, right? Through what some of the white supremacist groups and how they use the, kind of like some of the heathenry stuff. And I'm not super familiar in it, and I don't want to like offend anyone, but I also want to just like give you a chance, because I feel like it's important to untangle that there are separate branches here, that there are separate things happening here, that it's not all this big white supremacist ball of nastiness. Yeah.
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 Absolutely. Yeah. So, heathenry, in my understanding of it, is that it's a modern religious movement that tries to revitalize and create community and structure around the traditional practices, at least as far as we know about them from these Old Norse sources and other sources. Yes, and as part of that, there are different factions within those groups. There's something called Declaration 127, which is a statement that some organizations use to differentiate themselves from the groups that may be more oriented towards various forms of exclusionary tactics. So the Declaration 127 says, we're inclusive. We don't support those things, and we're an open and inclusive and a diverse healing community. So you find both types of organizations these days. Yes, the Old Norse and the Germanic. It's not even really accurate. I don't think I actually haven't seen anything in all my studies of the Old Norse material that really supports this, but it has been appropriated for the use of hate groups, as we know. And that's unfortunate, but there is a distinction being made in the communities, and there's definitely also movements against that. I don't consider myself heathen. I'm not part of a religious community. I have, I think, a broader spiritual practice that would fall under that name. And it's really important for me with my organization that people don't need to identify in any specific way. I really want it to be open to people of any background who feel called for whatever reason to be a part of it. And there are other organizations like that.
Well, I'm curious, would you just dive in there to the, because I know that you said that you weren't interested in the Old Norse myths until you really found a source that illuminated the underlying allegorical messages. Yeah.
Yes.
And I want to unpack that with you a little bit, right? Because it's like, I really, and just also like, thanks for being non-dogmatic about it. Like, awesome, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's such a welcome to like, oh, these myths and these cosmologies are available. Here's this like group of jerks over here who's using it in this way, but it's not rooted in the tradition. It's not in the text. It's not in the thing inherently. It's just, jerks being jerks, racists being racist, right?
Right.
And so, I just want to give you the chance to talk a little bit about the mythology and cosmology and kind of that mystical perspective that you have explored with it.
Yes. Well, so I wasn't interested in the Old Norse myths originally, mostly because I knew them through modern media sources, which are, which for me aren't that exciting. Also, even modern renditions of the myths, I wasn't that interested in. And there always felt like there was something missing, which of course now seems obvious because they're myths, which means they are allegorical and they're not meant to be taken literally, which I think in our modern culture we're kind of prone to read them as kind of literal stories. So I wasn't really interested in them before I encountered Maria Quillhaug's work, who does a brilliant job of decoding the allegory, and that just transformed everything for me rather profoundly. So kind of, for me in particular, it kind of took these, to whatever extent I was steeped in the our modern filters around like the Viking era and all the kind of the stereotypes that come with that. What it really did, what it does is it transforms this content, especially I'm talking in particular the cosmological and mythological content of the poetry, the Epic poetry. It takes that material and it makes it into a wisdom tradition. It makes it have universal messages that are about the transformation of consciousness and the initiation of consciousness into self-knowledge and into wisdom and into sovereignty. And for me, that's the soul of it. And for me, that's what had the juice. And now I love it. Thanks to Maria Quillhaug. I think it's brilliant. And I think it kind of, when you look at it that way too, it transforms a lot of the stereotypes around it, because a lot of our ideas about the Viking stereotype kind of fall apart when you actually look at the material and the emphasis on it.
It's really a mystical wisdom tradition.
Yeah, it's actually a mystical wisdom tradition.
Awesome. Yeah. Would you just clarify what Sather is?
Yeah, so my introduction into Sather changed that for me. What Sather is a trance mediumship practice that is attested to in medieval Norse sources. So these are sources that were started to be written down in the late 1100s and later. And so from these sources, which include the sagas and which include the poetry from that time frame, we have information about practitioners, for lack of a better word, a shamanic practice, a trance practice, an oracular practice. And there's different names for them depending on what they were doing and who they were. So modern Sather uses a template that is just the template of kind of content that's described from the past. And it takes that template and it creates a modern conduit for communication with the compassionate deities, the Old Norse deities, which in particular in this case are Odin, Freya, the Norns, and Hela. And just provides us with a template, a mediumistic template through which to create ceremony and transformational ritual around. It's characterized by the use of singing to journey, to enter an altered state of consciousness, which is one of the things that actually drew me to it as a musician and singer. It's characterized by the use of a staff as a medicine ally, and through that a connection to the world tree, which in this case is often called Yggdrasil. And it's characterized by the use of what's either called a high seat or a Sather seat, and this is kind of just a platform by which on which the practitioners sit and do the transmission from. All of these things have some precedence in the medieval Norse literature. But a caveat to that is there are not a lot of descriptions of it. So actually there's one main description which comes from the saga of Eric the Red that has the most description of a Sather event. And from that, we kind of have this modern template. And so several decades ago, people, especially in the group Yggdrasil and Annette Host in Denmark, started to experiment with Sather and with creating kind of a modern day form of it. And so over the decades, they've tailored that. And then I learned it from Betsy Bergstrom, who I forget her immediate teachers, but they learned from a net host. So kind of a net host is the lineage of this particular modern practice. So
do you have a sense, like, it sounds kind of like what I know as aspecting. Is it kind of similar? Have you heard that term?
I have heard that term. And there may be overlap between that and aspecting. We generally refer to it as conscious mediumship. And the idea with conscious mediumship is that we are inviting kind of our consciousness to be, our space to be shared by, in this case, the most compassionate aspect of one of these deities, usually is the case. And then to whatever extent that deity can come through, to more or less extent. But sometimes it's not necessarily, though, always an obvious characterization of that deity. Sometimes it's more subtle than that.
Okay, so this is what I understand, is that there's a seat and there's a practitioner who's sitting on the seat, and it's kind of like they move their consciousness out of the way a little bit and invite in through song a deity, a kind and compassionate aspect of one of these main Norse deities. And then the Norse deity comes in, it's kind of like possesses or comes in to their consciousness. They share consciousness in the same body. And then the person who's the practitioner is like answering questions or with members of the community in the ritual. Is that what's kind of happening?
Yes. And the practitioners remain sovereign. So it's not a true possession in that way, but they are sharing, their conscious space. Yes. And then we call them seekers. Members of the community can come up and they can ask questions, or they can ask for blessings. And so part of it is perhaps informational exchange, and part of it is actually transmitory. So it's sometimes called operant divination, where you're also in a kind of a transformational space. So bringing a question or asking for a blessing of the high seat, which can be one practitioner or actually several practitioners can also act at the same time, is in and itself a transformational event. And there's also a transmission element to it that happens. We also do what's called a healing high seat, which is intended to be just a direct transmission of healing energy, again, for anyone who wants to come up and seek that.
Yeah, it's cool. It's like a direct way to talk to a deity.
Yes.
Have an experience of a deity in living form.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I'm wondering if you would be willing to just share a little bit of how it's been for you, because we talk about ancestral lineage healing, all the time on the podcast, but like we don't actually necessarily go into, I mentioned a little bit at the beginning, like what are the impacts? What are the results? Like cool, yay, we're doing this, awesome. But like, what do we actually see as the results? How do we know that it's working? And just, would you be willing to share a little bit from your personal experience with it?
Yes, and to clarify specifically, my ancestral healing process.
Yes, your personal ancestral lineage healing process.
Okay.
How's it impacted your life and your work by helping your ancestors be in right relationship?
Yes, there have been a few ways that it's helped. One is that they were just kind of like, I've done many years of my personal work, my personal healing work, and seeking healing and transformation and that kind of thing. So I've done many years of that, and there were just still some kind of like lingering, tenacious kind of, I guess, holes in that I would say that just areas that were just really like not necessarily moving. And one area, which I think is rather important, is my sense of actually belonging on the earth. So I understand a lot of other people I know also have this kind of like sense of like, do we really belong here? Is this really our home? Why are we here? What are we doing? What does this all mean? Those kind of big questions. And for me, doing my ancestral lineage healing really kind of toned down those questions by quite a bit. I feel actually integrated into the earth system, if you would. I feel like actually I understand that I have a place and that I have a personal history here through my ancestry. And so it helped me feel just like, for those questions, just really quiet down. It's like, oh yeah, okay, it's right that I'm here, and it makes sense that I'm here. The other thing is that within, my immediate family, I'm kind of an outlier. There's no one else who does what I do, or even has much of an inclination to even go there. We're not even really religious, my family. And so for a long time, I felt like an outlier, and I felt like I didn't make sense within the context of my family exactly, except as someone who was supposed to step out of that context to some degree and do something else. But within the context of my ancestors, I make sense. And that was pretty special to me. It's like, so I no longer felt like an outlier, or a black sheep, if you will, but instead I'm part of this greater story. And it makes sense who I am based on this greater story. So that was pretty special for me. It also kind of helped me calm down that sense of, or any kind of internal dissonance I may have had with regards to, that wanting to feel like you belong to your family to at least some extent. And so that was really great. And then just kind of there's practical matters. I feel like, the ancestral input in our lives is big. And as someone who does mediumship work, the field of the ancestors, the energy of the ancestors is a very strong and present force with anyone. So they really kind of, one, it's like kind of like cleaning up the environment in which to do mediumship work. It really helps to have the ancestors well and supportive in order to do the mediumship work for a variety of reasons. But it also helps, I think, myself and people feel rooted and grounded in themselves, and it helps you kind of have a stronger sense, I think, of core self, which is really essential to have when you're doing mediumship work, obviously, because you're kind of doing this altered state of consciousness. You're entering altered states of consciousness, and in doing so, you have to also be able to return to yourself and have a strong sense of core self to do that. And I think doing the ancestral work really provides an excellent foundation on which to do spirit work in general, and mediumship in particular.
Yeah, thanks for saying all of that. That's been my experience as well, of like that sense of the belonging, and it's subtle. It's not like all of a sudden you're just like, oh yeah, totally, I belong here. But it's like over time, there is that I loved how you said it. The question's quieting down, and just that sense of like, oh, I get to be here. I get to take up space. I get to be well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm going to invite you to sing here in a second. And I just had a thought, if this feels okay to you, and if not, no worries. But if you want, one of the things that doesn't make it onto the recordings of the podcast is the prayer that we always set at the beginning, in which we really ask that the medicine that is whatever is happening inside the interview of the podcast is the right medicine for everyone who hears it and their ancestors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just would like to, if it feels like the right thing to you, to give you the opportunity after the song to sink into that mediumship and just see if there's anything that wants to be said as medicine. And if there's not, it's fine. But just to see if there's anything there, yeah?
Okay. And when you say mediumship, so mediumship for my ancestors, or?
Well, just that I guess like that role of is there anything here that in service to the world that you, Maris, are creating with the healing work that you're doing and offering? Is there anything that wants to be present and named in the interview?
Okay.
Yeah. Does
Sure.
that sound okay?
Yeah.
So, do you want to say anything about what we're going to hear?
Oh, the song that I'm going to sing? Yes. Okay. So this song is also a stanza from an Old Norse poem. This poem is called the Voluspa, and it means the prophecy of the Cirrus. This is a cosmological poem. It tells of the creation of the universe and also the destruction of things in what we know of as Ragnarok, and then also a rebirth that happens after Ragnarok. So it goes through this whole kind of cycle of creation, of destruction, and then recreation. I'm actually making the whole poem into songs. So this is one segment. This segment is the third stanza of the Valdusva. And let's see, it translates as, this is a bit of a non-conventional translation, but this is Merrick Philhaug's translation, more or less. And it's kind of an invocation of like the beginning creative energies. So it says, in the beginning, there was a wave, a big wave where sound built. There was neither sand nor sea nor cruel little waves. The earth was not yet created, nor the heavens. And the Gunungagap, which may be the great void, had no growth. So it's kind of talking about this phase of creation in which those were the conditions. So that is the translation. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Var är rymma buden? Var sanden särne svallar ner? Jag fanns skuva näubamen. Dat vargen ungandras verge. Avalda var är rymma buden? Var sanden särne svallar ner? Jag fanns skuva näubamen. Gab vargen ungandras verge. Avalda för rymma bygder var sanden särne svallar ner. Jag fann skuva näubamen. Gab vargen ungandras verge. Gab vargen ungandras verge. Gab vargen ungandras verge. I'm going to call on only the most compassionate aspects of the Seither beings and also my wise and well ancestors. And I'm going to ask, is there anything that you would like to be said, anything communicated through this medium that hasn't been said that would be good medicine at this time? Yeah, so there's just this great amount of welcome and joy from the deities to those who feel called to this work, to those who feel called to their ancestors, to those who feel called for Seither. But there's just this like immense heart and welcome being extended. They're saying don't get caught up in all that other stuff. Don't get caught up in the conflict and in the and all that stuff. That they're here and that they're welcoming, and there's a way of doing it well. And they welcome being a part of this time, and they welcome the ancestors to return to wellness. And yes, they're just, it's welcome, welcome, welcome. So just with great heart.
Those compassionate ones, and to your well and bred ancestors, and also to you, Maris, for the gift of your voice and your song and your work and your study and all that you do to bring wellness into this world. I feel ever grateful for that. My heart, every time I hear you sing, my heart just like has this huge swelling rush of like, oh yes, it's so great and magical to listen to you, and I just really appreciate it. So thank you for that. And I just want to really encourage folks that you they can work with you. You offer ancestral lineage healing sessions remotely for anywhere in the world. You have all kinds of courses and Seither initiation intensives and you're doing a lot of stuff. And again, I'm just going to send folks to your website, which is the livingvoicemedicine.com, livingvoicemedicine.com, and just to see if there's anything you want to say about the welcome that you would like to give to folks. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's my passions. It's one of my deep loves to actually share this work and to share Sather in particular. We do work only with the most compassionate aspects of these deities. We have, it's important that the work have integrity, that the work be really good medicine for everybody, and that it be inclusive, that it be totally diverse and inclusive as people want it to be. And just that there's, for those who are drawn to it either through soul affinities, curiosities, or ancestry, that there is a viable spirit practice to be had within this particular tradition. And for me, it was like a homecoming, to find it. But there's just, one of my visions is for there to be, Sather communities in different places so that people can be offered what Sather has to offer. The communities can be offered, general communities can be offered the high seats so that this medicine may go further than it is now. And yeah, I'm just anyone who feels that call is welcome. To either come to my trainings. I do online classes. There's just a range of things that I offer, and I can also travel if there's people who have a community they want to start building.
And I want to be really clear that, like, if many folks who are white have Northern European ancestry.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so, like, this work is the antidote to cultural appropriation, right? Like,
yes.
Just to like really belabor the point here.
Yes, Pavini, thank you for being that direct about it. Yes, one of the things that really inspires me about this is it's a transformational ceremony that comes from a Northern European tradition. It's viable, it's potent, it's alive. It's a living medicine, and yes, and it can be, part of what I was looking for was something like that didn't require participating in the ritual technology of other cultures, yes, and all the problems that kind of brings up. So yes.
Yeah, so come sit and Sather with Maris.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. It's been so great to have you here on Bespoken Bones. Yeah.
Thank you, Pavini. It's been great.
Yeah. I love it. Thanks everyone for listening to this episode. And if you feel inspired by what you heard here, you can check out my website, which is trancestralhealing.com, and you can learn more about the sexual and ancestral wellness work that I offer. And, again, just love to hear from you. Love to hear your questions, your suggestions. Actually, the impetus to interview Maris came from a suggestion from somebody who was like, hey, I need some help with this Northern European stuff. So really it impacts me and my decision-making to hear from you. So please reach out. I'm Pavini Moray, and I will be back every full and new moon with more embodied goodness and ancestral wisdom.